The season is less than a month away. Fall camps are in session. Oh, what a glorious thing to be able to say. But now that we're getting to that time, who's got the biggest question marks and who's got the most answers when it comes to the quarterback room and who's kind of like everywhere else in between? We'll answer that today. Let's go.
Are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster. Thanks for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe wherever you're listening to or watching the show. Thank you to everybody out there who's done so already. We just hit 800 subscribers on the YouTube channel, which is awesome. Even more than that on when you factor in the podcast numbers. Like, I'm just so grateful that you're all out there and enjoying the show for however much longer it exists, as we like to joke here for the last few weeks and such. But this episode, which is still rolling along, is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered the season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Quick note here at the top, because this is the last show that I'm recording before I go on vacation for a couple weeks. Everything, there's still going to be shows. Don't worry. You got 19 in the next couple weeks coming your way, 20 or so. I don't know. I forget how to do math and I lost count at some point. But fear not, the show will continue even in my absence. But if you want to get in touch with me, at Smalls_55 is the Twitter handle, or at LO_Pac-12. You can hop in the YouTube comments as well. Ask me something in there. I won't be able to give you an answer on the show, regular mailbag style for a little bit until I'm back on the 22nd. So the 23rd is the first time that question might get answered. But I could always just shoot you a message back, send you some thoughts if you have a question you want me to dive into. What we're diving into today is the quarterback position, most important in all of sports. And everybody right now, as fall camps begin and we start to get that sense of excitement and optimism about what the 2022 season might hold, may it be unpredictable as can be. I would love it if all my predictions are just wildly wrong and way off base, because that means we've got a lot of excitement. But that probably won't be the case. But, I'm not going to be right all the time. That's what makes it fun. It's trying to be right, understanding how you can be right, but then also admitting when you're wrong, which I will be wrong plenty as it pertains to my predictions and such. And that's okay, because we're going to have fun with it no matter what. But I want to go through each team's quarterback room and kind of where they're at in terms of who knows what's happening, for who's going to be behind or under center, and who has a few more question marks there. Let me knock the four boring ones out of the way. It's not a slight against any of these teams. It's just that they know exactly what their quarterback situation is, and there's just not that much to it. USC, Utah, Washington State, and Stanford. I can tell you who's going to be starting for all of them. No one's going to push back on it. Caleb Williams at USC, Cam Rising at Utah. Washington State will start their incoming transfer, Cam Ward. Stanford will be rolling Tanner McKee out ahead of what could be his final year before he goes to the NFL. We'll see how it goes down. But those four, no questions, no debate, no intrigue, nothing there. The team that's the most interesting when it comes to the quarterback position is Washington. And that's because Washington right now, I do not believe they've named a starter as I record this on August 4th. And I don't expect them to until fall camp comes to a close. Now, Kalen DeBoer may very well have an idea of what's going to happen. I have my own thoughts, which I'll share today, on what they should be doing. But at Pac-12 Media Days, I think that was last weekend. It's all blurring together. Yeah, it was last weekend. In Pac-12 Media Days, Kalen DeBoer was asked about the quarterback situation there, and he did not, tip his cap directly as to who a starter might be, though I think we have an idea. But he said the quarterback is a big part of his offense, that it's the driver of his offense, and that makes it even more important of a decision in terms of who is behind or under center there for the Huskies. And I don't think that's the case for every team, right? Teams like Cal, Oregon State that want to run the ball first, Oregon in the last several years with Cristobal, it hasn't mattered quite as much who's behind center because of how they play stylistically. But what was noteworthy here was, without being prompted to do so, DeBoer mentioned Michael Penix first. the Indiana transfer. They had a year together back when DeBoer was the offensive coordinator at Indiana. He was the OC, then he was the head coach of Fresno State for 2 years, 10 wins in 2021. Now he's Washington's head coach, and he brings Penix over from Indiana, presumably to be the starter, which I understand, and I'll get to in a moment. He then talks about Dylan Morris, who started last year, and I think on the whole left Husky fans with a lot to be desired on that front. And he was ahead of a guy who played a little at the end of the year, but didn't seem quite ready for the moment. That's former five-star quarterback Sam Huard. And he said, look, all three want to be the starter, but he did not name one. He talked about, they need to distribute the ball first and foremost. That's the most important thing a quarterback can do in his offense. That's coming from his mouth, not mine. And then that they don't have to have a running ability. That's not something that he predicates his offensive philosophy on. It's a tool that anyone could have, but he said he'd rather he have mental toughness and the ability to get the ball to all the weapons on the field rather than just being a guy who is mobile all the time. But he mentioned Penix first. He talked about Dylan Morris, and he spoke to the improvements that he has seen him make this offseason. Whether or not those can materialize on the field is a completely different question based on what we saw in 2021. And when talking about Sam Huard, he referred to him as, quote, the up-and-comer, and the guy who is the furthest from his ceiling because he has had limited snaps at this point in time. And to me, what he said there at the end about the limited snaps is why, if I were Washington's new head football coach going into 2022, I would start Sam Huard. Would I have brought in Penix to back him up? Yeah, maybe. I mean, a veteran presence for a young quarterback, whether in college or the pros, can be a really valuable thing. I don't think that would have been a bad move in any sense. But if I'm Kalen DeBoer, I would go with Sam Huard here. And the reason is that Washington, in my view, is in more of a rebuild than some people realize. Their over-under win total this year is 7.5. I think they're going to be well under that. I think if they just get to 500, that'd be good. But regardless of how you feel about them this year, ask yourself this question. Is Washington going to be close to the type of program that it is capable of being in 2022 record-wise? I think there's a pretty understood consensus that the answer is no, since their peak is getting to the college football playoff and winning the Pac-12 multiple times. That's not something they're going to accomplish in 2022. Neither of those things will take place. That'll be my first big prediction here on the show. I know, really, really bold. I'm going out on a limb. Washington won't win the conference, nor will they get to the Pac-12 championship game. But I would play the long game there with the quarterback room. I would go with Sam Huard, let him grow, let him make mistakes, and then by the time you get some recruits on there, get your offensive system working and fully implemented, guys buying into it, feeling comfortable with it in 2023, then you can take a step forward because he said he's the furthest away because he's had limited snaps right now. Well, you only have so many years with a guy. I mean, I know that Huard is still young, but he's not going to be there forever. And I don't think there's just a ton to be gained from a record standpoint or a reputation standpoint by starting Michael Penix this year. So I'd go with Huard. But right now, I do think it's more of an open competition than other teams are having. I think it's the most open competition. The fact that he made a point to mention all three of them, I think he's probably the only coach at Pac-12 Media Days that mentioned three quarterbacks going into fall camp. That's just not something that everyone is in a position to be able to do, but he was, and he did. I'd go with Huard. I imagine they end up going with Penix because he's the most ready to win games right now. But if I were Washington, I'd be playing the long game here, and I think your long-term future is tied up there in Sam Huard at the quarterback position because he does have the highest ceiling. His physical traits are far beyond either Dylan Morris or Michael Penix, and he just needs the reps. He just needs the snaps. And maybe he'll take over at some point this year, but we'll just have to see how that all plays out. Everybody else has got some questions. They've got some assurances. We'll get to all of the 11 other Pac-12 schools that are not quite as fascinating, but still compelling when it comes to their quarterback rooms. But first, I tell you about Bet Online, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, go Mariners, by the way, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even my personal favorite, golf. Bet Online continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information. From live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts, they have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So there are some other teams that have a mild question marks at the quarterback position. I don't think any as severe as Washington because they just have such big picture ramifications in terms of who they roll out this year. But Colorado's is also interesting because they're the next closest to having a real competition or question mark about who's going to take a snap in week one. They play September 1st against TCU. Colorado has Brendan Lewis on the roster, was a freshman last year, made some freshman mistakes. His completion percentage was under 60%. The offense didn't do a lot, but he does have experience. But JT Shrout is coming off of an injury. He's expected to be able to compete for the starting quarterback job as well. I don't know that it's super clear who the leader is at this point in time. I imagine it'd be Brendan Lewis because he played in 2021, and Carl Durrell's talked about the youth that was on that team and how he expects them to be better because they were young, even though they got hit in the transfer portal pretty hard this offseason. I think their defense losing Blackman and Gonzalez, the corners, I think that's pretty tough. And then you lose Broussard and Rice offensively. Those are real playmakers at important skill positions. But I don't think that Brendan Lewis, though I imagine he'd have somewhat of an edge, his performance as a freshman, even when you expect freshmen to make mistakes, right, and have growing pains, like that's normal as a quarterback. He did not do enough to claim the job in 2021. So if JT Shrout comes into fall camp and starts to really look good, there's a decent chance, I'd say good chance, he could be starting week one. He'd have to do that, right? I'm not saying that's super likely, but what I am saying is that job is not Brendan Lewis's to lose, right? Like other teams that I'm going to get to here, they have quarterbacks who it's their job or it's his job to lose, right? Or it's his job or nobody else's job essentially to start a quarterback. But I don't think that Brendan Lewis has got that locked down. So I think Colorado is the second most interesting. Next one, this is when we start to get in the territory of I know who's most likely going to be starting, but there's still something to keep an eye on here. And that's Oregon State, Arizona State, and Cal. And I'll throw Oregon kind of into that group as well. But Oregon State, I imagine this is Chance Nolan. I mean, last year they started Sam Neuer in that Purdue game. It didn't go well, and Chance Nolan came in and made a difference. And the Beavs went 7-6 last year, which was the best year they've had so far under Jonathan Smith. And Chance Nolan did a lot of good things. Completion percentage in the low 60s. His touchdown interception ratio can improve, but was solid. I thought he's got a decent arm. He's kind of mobile. Doesn't have to be in that offense. You got to be able to throw on the run because Smith loves to do play action boots and such, not from a very pro style offensive attack. But I think that job is Chance Nolan's. I'd watch for Tristan Gebbia, right? I mean, that's a name that could creep up if Nolan starts to struggle and can't find the success that he had a year ago, or obviously if he gets hurt, Gebbia is a guy who's going to step in there. But based on last year and the fact that Jonathan Smith complimented Chance Nolan when he was at Pac-12 Media Days and made a point to do that, I think it's pretty indicative of the fact that he's going to be the starter, and I think he should. I think he deserves a chance to be a starter for a full season and see if he can build on what he had last year. You want to see some areas of growth for sure. Consistency being consistently delivering the ball in an accurate manner, I think is the place where he can improve the most at the quarterback position. But I think he did more than enough last year to where I can confidently say that should be the starter and he should be given every chance to succeed there and not be on some short leash or anything. Speaking of that term, the short leash, let's go to Arizona State. Their head coach is on a short leash. You come out and stumble to a 1-3 beginning. I think Herm will be out of there in Tempe, and they'll be looking for a new coach. But at the quarterback position, you lose Jaden Daniels, which sucks in one sense, though apparently he was not particularly well liked in the locker room based on a video that was taken by one of his teammates who were, let's just say, not exactly sad that he was leaving, it seems. That's enough on that. But they bring in Emory Jones from Florida, former highly rated 4-star recruit. Didn't exactly pan out at Florida. It's not bad. I mean, he's serviceable. He can move for sure. Like he'll make some plays with his legs. He's won college football games before. He's not going to be intimidated by a big environment like when Arizona State goes to Oklahoma State in, I believe it's week 2 in Stillwater. I don't think that they're going to be in a situation where the quarterback is not ready for the environment or intimidated by the fans, like that's certainly a plus to having Emory Jones there. But here's the thing. I think the Emory Jones transfer is fine. It's fine. Like, he could win you some games. But notice how I phrase that. He could win you some games. That's how I feel about Emory Jones. Herm Edwards needs to win a lot of games. He's got to win at least 8 this year, or I think Arizona State has to have a new coach. And if Emory Jones is not cutting it in the early going and they're having some losses, then a change could be made. They've got Paul Tyson on the roster, a former 4-star quarterback who comes over from Alabama, and Emory Jones is expected to be the starter. Maybe Tyson leapfrogs him on the depth chart in fall camp and surprises everybody. Maybe, but I think it's going to be Emory Jones. But I don't think he's going to go in and be allowed to have 2 or 3 stinkers, and people say, well, he needs to be given time to figure it out and adjust and whatnot. Like, no, Herm knows, or at least Herm should know, that he's got to win at least 8 games this year, if not 9, to be able to comfortably keep his job. Because if they come out and go 6-7, I don't think even 7-5 would be enough. But if they, are headed for a season that's at or below 500, then that's where a change will have to be made at the quarterback position if Emory Jones is not lighting the world up. Now, if Arizona State's losing and Jones is playing well, then he'll probably be fine. But that's one where I think the leash is kind of short because Herm Edwards has to win, and if he sees the quarterback as being a position where they're not getting the most out of their signal caller, then they might make a switch there and try to change the mojo to put up some W's on the schedule. Cal is in a similar situation to Arizona State. Now, after getting an extension, a rather large extension, you would think Justin Wilcox is not under a ton of pressure, but based on how the records have gone and how 2021 played out, which was pretty disappointing for Cal, he should be under a little more pressure. I talked about that recently. Like, there should be more pressure on Justin Wilcox, but Cal's expectations as a football program have just not been very high. And so I don't know exactly what their standards are for success or failure going into 2022. But I think at some point Wilcox needs to start consistently winning games. Like at Cal, you got to at least, if you get that big of an extension, it's a 6-year contract. I mean, that's a long time to make that sort of commitment. And maybe he used the offer from Oregon as leverage to get that sort of deal. I don't know, but at some point you got to be able to consistently win 6 to 8 games at Cal to be able to continue to be their head football coach. But they bring in Jack Plummer from Purdue, who I've talked about here. He's fine. He's not a disaster, right? He can make a play every now and then, but he's not very mobile. He doesn't have a big arm. He's pretty accurate, but he's not amazing at pushing the ball down the field consistently. It's not a strength of his. I'm sure Plummer will be the starter, and maybe he'll be serviceable enough, but he did get benched at Purdue last year. That's why he left the Boilermakers to come to Berkeley. And if things don't go well, I think not with as much pressure, but a similar mindset to what Herm Edwards needs to have at Arizona State, Justin Wilcox will look at his team and go, boy, the offense isn't there again, and I need to win football games as a head coach to justify that contract and shut down, any potential rumors of, is this the right guy for the job? And I think if Plummer starts to underwhelm, which I'm not saying he will, but I'm saying he could, right? Like Caleb Williams is not going to underwhelm at USC. DTR this year is not going to underwhelm at UCLA. I know what I'm getting from those guys. But Plummer, there's a situation I could foresee playing out where Cal fans look at the on-field product and say this guy is not cutting it, and then the little birds will start to chirp, and you'll start to read some pieces from people who cover the Bears saying like, so. You've got 4-star quarterback Kai Milner on there, who's a pretty highly rated recruit. You got 3-star quarterback Zach Johnson. Like, if this is the best we're getting with Jack Plummer here, is there nothing better? Like, are those guys way worse than this guy? And if so, why are they both way worse than this guy? Because, and then again, that's if Jack Plummer goes out there and performs the way he did over the latter portion of the games he started last season at Purdue. But I think that's one to monitor because that might even be. No, I think Arizona State's still more interesting because of the pressure on Herm. But from a quarterback situation, I think Cal's got one where you might want to throw in the young guy if the veteran transfer you brought in doesn't start to work. Speaking of veteran transfers, Bo Nix is most likely going to be the starter for Oregon. I don't think that's much of a secret, but in case it is for people out there, Bo Nix will be the starter for Oregon this year. But assuming that's the case, the Ty Thompson situation becomes more and more interesting as each day passes without him playing, and you just kind of have in the back of your mind, especially now that Oregon has got Dante Moore coming in the class of 2023, a 5-star and one of the top QBs in next year's recruiting cycle. You start to ask yourself the possibility, will Ty Thompson ever start a game at Oregon? There's a very realistic scenario where that answer is no. Bo Nix stays healthy this year and does a good enough job to be the starting quarterback, and Ty Thompson has not surpassed him at this point in time. And then you go into next year, and maybe Dante Moore comes in and he's more refined than Thompson or Jay Butterfield, and he's the starter. And then Ty Thompson might look to transfer. That's a very realistic situation. And so if Bo Nix, God forbid, were to suffer an injury this year, be fascinating to see which quarterback between him and a 4-star guy named Jay Butterfield, for those of you who don't know, who's on the roster as well, which of them would go into the game if Bo Nix were to go down with an injury. Butterfield is more accurate, but Thompson has a better arm and better physical traits. But there's not a clear distinction between which one is above the other on the depth chart right now. And I just think every day that passes where Ty Thompson's not the starter, it'll start to creep into everybody's minds. Like, well, is he ever going to be the starter, or does he just not have it and he wasn't able to claim the job? And is he going to end up transferring out without starting a game at Oregon? I think that's a fascinating situation to follow. Last two here for the quarterback rooms. I'm a big Jaden Delora fan. I think he's a gamer. He just goes out there and plays his arse off and just wants to ball. I mean, that guy loves playing football. There's nothing else to it. And he's not the biggest, not the strongest, doesn't have the biggest arm, but he's effective. And I think he's a really good leader out there on the field as well. And he likes to go out there and ball. That's what he wants to do. He's probably going to be the starter for Arizona. I can't imagine that he wouldn't be. I saw someone, I think it was the Arizona play-by-play guy, tweet out that he was getting first-team reps as fall camp opened. Noah Fafita is there on the roster, a guy who they're pretty high on down there in Tucson. So, he's waiting in the wings in a sense, but the thing kind of similar to Ty Thompson here that I'd watch for in that scenario is Noah Fafita's there, and Jaden Delora, I believe he has 3 years of eligibility left because his first season was the COVID year, so that didn't count. So he could play football for 3 more years. Is Fafita really going to wait for 3 years? Maybe he will. Maybe he'll take a red shirt and be a redshirt junior by the time he comes around. It's his turn to start, or maybe Delora would leave the program or try to go pro. I don't know, right? There's a number of different ways those things can play out. But I wonder if, Jaden Delora is Arizona's quarterback for the next 2 or 3 years. Will Fafita hang around, or will he ever seriously challenge him, right? I mean, that's the other thing you watch for in fall camp this year is how close does Noah Fafita come to really giving Jaden Delora a run for his money for Arizona's starting quarterback job. And then lastly here, for the one that has like any amount of intrigue. And again, these are lower on the list. I'll say I think Arizona and UCLA are a step below Oregon State, Arizona State, Cal, and Oregon that have some intrigue and the way things could shift around. But UCLA, I have just one question about their quarterback room. I know it's going to be DTR. It should be DTR. He's probably one of the 3 best quarterbacks in the Pac-12 this year. I think I'd probably go Caleb Williams, then Cam Rising, then probably DTR going into the season. We'll see what Cam Ward is able to do up at Washington State. He could be really good as well. But the only question I've got for UCLA's quarterback room is if DTR gets a little banged up, which has happened before, especially for a guy who runs that much, how ready can Ethan Garbers be to fill in and keep UCLA afloat? Because that's what you would need from a backup quarterback in that situation, just keep you afloat. Because UCLA, their schedules are really favorable this year. They could rack up a lot of wins, but if DTR goes down and then the offense starts to suffer because he's not there, then that is not what you would want to see as a Bruins fan. And so that's the question I have is, what is your backup plan if something happens to Dorian Thompson-Robinson next year? It'd be much more interesting for UCLA and what will be their final season in the Pac-12. But I think that is really the only thing there, because DTR, we know what he is, and he's been rock solid. Appreciate everyone listening. See you next time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.